Have you ever loved someone so deeply that letting go felt impossible? For Meryl Streep, one of Hollywood's most private and respected icons, silence was always her shield. But now, after years of whispers and quiet heartbreak, she's finally opening up. And what she reveals about love, loss, and identity will leave you stunned. The Private Queen of Hollywood. You know, when people talk about Meryl Streep, it's almost impossible not to think of her as untouchable. The woman who could play anyone, feel everything, and yet, somehow, reveal nothing about herself. For decades, Meryl built a career on emotion, vulnerability, and truth. But in her personal life, she guarded her heart like a fortress. The red carpets, the Oscars, the dazzling speeches, all of it painted a picture of perfection. But behind those calm eyes was a woman quietly holding her world together. Her marriage was often described as one of Hollywood's rare fairy tales. Decades of partnership, laughter, and deep respect. They raised children, built a home far from the chaos of Los Angeles, and lived by one rule: privacy above everything. To the world, Meryl's love story seemed unbreakable, a symbol of what every couple hoped to be. But what no one saw were the moments between the scenes, the quiet dinners gone silent, the growing distance between two people who once shared everything. As her fame continued to soar, so did the weight of expectation. Every role she played, from Sophie's Choice to the Iron Lady, demanded more of her soul, and little by little, she started pouring herself into her characters instead of her marriage. Acting became her safe space, a place to feel what she couldn't say out loud. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of the quiet unraveling. Those close to her say Meryl never spoke ill of her husband, never blamed him. She just retreated. Her smiles remained for the cameras, her poise never faltered. But there was something in her eyes, that unmistakable sadness that only those who've lived through heartbreak can recognize. The truth is, even the strongest, most graceful people can break in silence. And Meryl, the queen of restraint, knew how to hide her pain better than anyone else. But as the years went on, that silence began to speak louder than words. Something inside her was changing, and the world was about to see a very different side of Meryl Streep. The silence after the storm. When the news of Meryl Streep's separation first broke, the world was stunned. How could she, the symbol of grace, stability, and quiet strength, face something as painfully human as divorce? For years, she had been the gold standard of balance, a thriving career, a devoted wife, a loving mother. And then, suddenly, that perfect picture shattered. Quietly, without scandal, without tears on camera. Just silence. Meryl didn't rush to explain herself. No public statement, no magazine tell-all, no emotional interviews. Instead, she vanished behind that dignified smile the world knew so well. But those close to her say the silence wasn't indifference. It was survival. The pain was there, heavy and raw. But Meryl chose to process it privately, the same way she had faced every battle before, with quiet courage. In her home, the walls that once echoed with laughter now carried the soft stillness of someone learning to be alone again. Friends say she spent more time in her garden, more time writing letters she'd never send. Acting, once her great escape, became something deeper, almost spiritual. Each role she took after the divorce seemed to mirror her emotional reality. Strength wrapped in fragility, wisdom born from heartbreak. She was still the Meryl Streep the world adored, but something in her had shifted. The sparkle in her eyes had turned into something else, a kind of knowing, the kind that only comes from pain you've had to endure in silence. For a woman who had lived much of her life in the public eye, Silence became her rebellion. She refused to let the world dissect her heartbreak, refused to turn her pain into performance. And yet, through her films, through her quiet presence, she began speaking louder than ever. People around her noticed the small things, the way she paused before answering questions in interviews, the way her voice softened when she spoke about change and acceptance. She was healing, but not in the way most people do. She wasn't trying to move on. She was trying to understand. And in that silence, she found something profound: freedom. For the first time in decades, Meryl was living not as someone's wife, not as Hollywood royalty, but as herself. A woman rediscovering what it means to simply be. But even then, one question lingered. What had really happened? What was the truth she was holding back? That answer would finally come, not through gossip or speculation, but through Meryl's own quiet, heartbreaking confession. Meryl's honest confession. When Meryl Streep finally broke her silence, it wasn't during a glamorous red carpet interview or an emotional sit-down special. It happened quietly, almost like a whisper. During a reflective moment in a rare interview, she spoke not as an actress, not as a star, but as a woman who had lived through love, loss, and everything in between. Her words were calm, but behind them was decades of emotion she had kept tucked away. She admitted that the end of her marriage wasn't about scandal or betrayal. It was about time, distance, and the slow erosion that happens when two lives grow in different directions. Sometimes, she said softly, you wake up one day and realize you've become a different person than the one you married. And that's nobody's fault. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't regret. It was acceptance. Meryl spoke about how love doesn't always end with anger. Sometimes it just transforms. What once was passion becomes companionship, and then, quietly, fades into gratitude. I'll always care, she confessed, but I've learned that love changes shape. And when it does, you have to let it go. Those words hit people deeply, because they were so human. In a world obsessed with perfection, Meryl showed that even the most admired among us are not immune to heartbreak. She revealed that her silence all those years wasn't about pride, it was about protecting something sacred. The public doesn't need to know every detail of your pain, she said. Sometimes, healing needs quiet. Since then, Meryl has carried herself with a renewed sense of calm. She spends more time with her children and grandchildren, finds joy in small, ordinary moments. The laughter over a family dinner, the peace of reading by a window, the beauty of getting older without apology. Her story is no longer one of loss, but of rebirth. She may have lost a marriage, but she found herself again. And maybe, in a way, that's the truest form of love there is. Learning to love yourself enough to start over. Meryl's story reminds us that even the strongest hearts can break, but they can also rebuild. Her silence was never weakness. It was survival. And now, her honesty is her greatest performance yet. If her words touched you, like, comment, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories from behind Hollywood's bright lights.